Hi everyone. So today we are going to talk about register as it relates to communication. So register in this case, in this context, refers to variations of language use, and it's most commonly understood as the level of formality in communication. So we're not talking about registering for a course. We're not talking about register like a cash register. We are talking about register as a level of language that's related to various types of settings. So here we go. Levels of register as identified by linguist Martin Juice. They are frozen, formal, consultative or consultative, depending on how you want to pronounce it, casual or informal, and intimate. So we'll take a look at each of these. So linguistic register, degree of formality in the message construction lets us know that register helps to determine things like turn taking. So, and we'll see this when we start to go through each of those 5 registers. Turn taking, vocabulary choice, use of contractions, like don't and won't, or do not and will not, volume of speech or size of signs for signers, clarity, such as diction and enunciation, speaker goals, use of fillers and hesitations, us, that kind of thing, and allowable topics of discussion. So there are more, but these are main components of communication that register helps to determine. So first we start off with frozen register, and frozen register is typically something that is considered static, right, or frozen, and is primarily delivered and rendered the same. So for example, we talk about the Pledge of Allegiance being frozen text. Well, that's because the Pledge of Allegiance is, the words don't change. They did in the past, but for the past many years, decades, the words haven't changed. They're always the same. The Miranda warnings, or the Miranda rights, those are the same. The question comes up is, what about those that don't speak English? Well, that's a different story because the Miranda warnings are frozen in English, but when you have to bring in interpreters of any language, at the moment, the Miranda warnings are not necessarily frozen because what you want is for the individual to understand their rights. And so I don't know in any of the languages other than English if the Miranda warnings are frozen. In fact, why don't you do some research and find out? Because I could see, in my mind, I could see that Spanish could be frozen, but I don't know that that to be true. I know for sure it's not frozen in sign language. So it becomes an interpretation of the English version of the Miranda warnings. But let's go back to frozen text. The English version of the Miranda warnings is frozen. Prayer, certain prayers, right? If you belong to a church that says the same type of prayer all the time and the text never changes, that would be considered frozen. Songs, right? Lyrics of songs don't change unless we do a mix or a mashup. But I make myself laugh. But typically the lyrics of songs don't change. And so that would be frozen because the lyrics are always the same. Formal register is typically communication that is moving in one direction. So what we would mean is from a speaker to like an audience. So if you think about from a stage to an audience, especially if it's a presentation or a speech, that would possibly be informal register. And most often the language used in formal register is very complete sentences, subject-specific terminology. Enunciation is going to be very clear, right? They're going to be speaking clearly. If you've ever heard a government speech, like the president speaking, or governors or mayors, typically when they're doing a formal news conference, their enunciation, their tone of voice, the way they even modulate their affect, their tone, is pretty specific. And then there's typically no opportunity during the speech for questions from the audience. So what that means is while you're giving the speech, you don't get interrupted. They may have a Q&A at the end of it, but during the speech, during that delivery, there would be no interruption. That would be typical of formal language. Consultative or consultative is very often in a setting where the interlocutors, right? We all know that's the people involved in the conversation, is a content area expert. So where one of the people involved, one of the interlocutors, is an expert possessing specialist knowledge that the client does not possess, so such as a doctor or a lawyer. So the doctor will provide the consultation to the patient. The patient is free to ask the doctor questions. The doctor will often employ medical terminology that they want to make sure that the patient understands. So this is consultative. It's an average person seeking the advice of a professional would be typical for a consultative register. When you're interpreting that into sign language, you're going to actually be operating in probably a couple of modes, in the sense of you'll be delivering the information the way that the doctor or the lawyer or the professional is giving it to their client, and then the client's language may be at a different level, right? They may not know all of the terminology that's involved from the professional, and so you'll have to manage that conversation back and forth. Casual and informal register, or casual/informal, casual or informal. The language in the casual register tends to be conversational, colloquial. It could include lots of euphemisms, equivocal language, and such. Frequently, this is used amongst friends and family, people that you have fairly close relationships with. Could be even colleagues at work when you're in certain situations at work. Word choices are generally familiar to everybody, so it's different than a consultative register where the professional might use terminology that the other person is not familiar with, the client. Conversations are often dependent upon prior dialogues, prior conversation, prior discourse. Gestures might be used in the discussions, right? If you ever think about some of your friends or family members that kind of talk and they do a lot of gesturing, that would be something we would see more in a informal or a casual conversation. Casual language is often peppered with slang, right, or profanity and humor, right? If you think about it, we're probably not using that type of terminology in a consultative type of setting or in a formal type of setting. And then we have intimate. And intimate means that you're very, very close to the parties. The parties involved are very, very close to each other. It means they know each other really, really, really well. So this means that the language shared between them may not be fully understood by anybody outside of their little communication circles. If you think about those of you who have families with multiple people in it and you see each other a lot, you can talk to each other. In some cases, you can talk to each other without even using words, right? You walk in, you go, and they go, and you already know what that means. The individuals often have a greater degree of intimacy, so we can think of siblings, spouses, close friends, that kind of relationship where you can communicate with somebody. You even have people that you can communicate with without any kind of vocal intonations. Even if you don't know sign language, you would possibly use your eyes or your face to give each other expressions, which communicates to each other, but nobody else who's in that same setting with you would understand that you two are actually communicating with each other, right? So for some of you that you understand that makes sense.